Hello, everyone. Today we'll discuss one of the chapters of Sandel's wonderful book, Chapter 4 on Markets and Morals. So we'll be looking in a bit more detail about the way in which the market forces bear upon morality, or the way in which morality should be affecting or intervening with or changing the otherwise unconstrained natural market forces. So how do markets and morals interact? Well, in the US in particular, the free market is very popular in many circles, in most circles. And proponents of the free market, a market with no government intervention or very little government intervention, put forth two claims as the grounds for the justification for having free markets. And one is that free markets respect individual freedoms and rights. Libertarians, that's the ground of libertarianism. That's the main justification for libertarianism. And it is the reason in favor of having free markets. It respects something valuable, individual freedom, individual rights, rights to property rights. And obviously, those things should be upheld. And the free market enables you to do some of that. Claim number two, free markets maximize welfare and prosperity, right? Proponents of free markets say things like, just let the market run its course, no government intervention, and then the overall pie, the overall economic, the economy will be better. The gross domestic product, for example, of a particular country will increase if there is little to no government regulations. Less government involvement, more economic pie for people to have. So in the long run, the free market is the way of maximizing economic prosperity for everyone. Those are the two main claims. And notice that those claims already involved moral considerations brought to bear in favor of the free market. So in this chapter, we'll assess more carefully whether or not those values, those claims, those moral justification for the market really hold, and whether there are any other moral constraints on the free market. There should be. Like a good society would not just let the free market run. It would have some other constraints. And the first objection to these claims in favor of the free market is this one. Many actual happenings in the market, if you actually look at the world, places where there's no government intervention, the thing that is championed as a free market, what happens there, the transactions are not really accurately described as free. It is many times, not always, but many times, not really a matter of the expression of individual freedom, of the choice to do with their labor or their property as people wish without intervention. What happens many times, especially in less developed countries, but everywhere, is something different. It's not an expression of freedom, it's something else. So poor workers take the low wages, not because it is a fair or they take it to be fair, in an expression of their freedom. In other words, poor workers by and large do not think, oh, this amount of money that I will get is a fair payment for my labor, and I'm happy and I'm expressing my freedom in exchanging my labor for this wage. Typically what happens is that low income workers, poor workers, take the job because that's one of the few options that they have. They have that option or nothing. And then they do it not because it's a free expression of the freedom, but because they have no choices. And that's why I have this painting here. Is the worker there freely using his freedom? Well, that's hard to, it's hard to say that that's what's happening here. It seems like a great distortion of what's happening here. If you're wealthy already, and you have a lot of options about what to do with your wealth. If you're wealthy and can afford to go to a good university, and then you can look at your options. What do I do with my time? How do I dedicate my talents? You have all of this freedom of choice, right? All of this multiplicity of options for you to choose from. And your freedom seems to be kind of amplified or augmented by the wealth, or the options that the wealth gives you do help you express your freedom. If you have a lot of money, you can decide where to invest it. You use your freedom to invest it. So there is a claim that is legitimate, put forward by the free market, by the proponents of the free market. Wealthy people, if there was no government intervention, it does maximize their freedom to use, their life as they see fit, their income as they see fit, their wealth as they see fit. So their individual freedom is protected and enshrined and maximized by no government regulations. But that's only the wealthy. The poorer you are, the less that's applicable, and the more you do what you have to do so that you can make ends meet and so that you can have food on the table. And that's no longer your free choice. That's what you must do to endure and survive and be around, pay the bills. And unfortunately, the vast majority of societies in a contemporary world, most people fit into the second description. Even if they're not quite poor, they're still, working so that they can make ends meet, not because it's a mere expression of their freedom they could have gotten elsewhere easily. So the less wealth you have, the more your freedom is not protected but reduced. The claim number one, free markets respect individual freedom, is true for wealthy people, and a lot less true the less wealth you have. The less wealth you have, the less there's any freedom there to respect. The less what's happening is you're just being forced because of circumstances to do something against your will, pretty much. Not quite, but your freedom is a lot more restrained and reduced than otherwise. So claim once as stated is very dubious. It's empirically false if it meant to apply to all people. That's a serious limitation of the argument for free market. Furthermore, objection number two, free market maximize welfare and economic prosperity. Well, it does to some extent, but not equally. And this is crucial. It is wealthy people that disproportionately benefit from the free market precisely because their wealth gives them a greater bargaining power. Someone who has options and freedom, and they're thinking about investing their money, they can look at a potential investment option. And if their rate of return is not over 20% or whatever, they can say, no, never mind, I'll just take my money elsewhere. They have a greater bargaining power, right? If someone needs the money so they can run their business, they might be willing to lose a lot so that they can get the money. Put differently, the more wealth you have, the more bargaining power you have, and therefore, typically, the more money you end up making in the long run, just because you end up making deals that you get benefit more disproportionately, precisely because you have a greater bargaining power. The poorer you are, the less money you have, the less bargaining power you have, and therefore the more forced into decisions you're put in the free market, in the no government regulation market, and the poorer you become in the long run, just because you make less money out of your investments, you make less money out of your wages and so on. Why? Because you have less bargaining power to make those decisions. So the natural trajectory of the free market is to make the wealthy super wealthy and the poor to remain in poverty. That's just the natural side effect of the free market. So two, as stated, is actually false as well. It at least disproportionately benefits the wealthy. And this is because of wealth, not because of talent, right? Someone who's very wealthy doesn't need to know much about business. They can just hire a business advisor and pay them some money, and then the business advisor makes the decisions, and the wealthy person still keeps the money just because they were the owners. And that's how the actual market works. So it doesn't quite maximize welfare in the way in which it sounds more appealing. And that's a serious limitation of the free market as well. But so these are serious objections to the main reasons we're thinking that we should have a free market, no government interventions at all. Let's look at other moral considerations for thinking that some things should not just be bought and sold. We look at things like sexual activity. Should sexual favors be the kinds of things that one buys and sells in the free market? Arguably not. They seem to be cheapened. They seem to be kind of stained by the value of making love to someone as an expression of love. Engaging in an intimate act as an expression of love seems to just be lost altogether when the similar kind of activity happens for the sake of money. The activity that loving spouses do seems to be just radically different than the activity that, say, prostitute and a client do. Something has been cheapened by becoming a commodity. And here's a case study with soldiers. It seems that buying soldiers cheapens something. That something has gone wrong when soldiers are being bought and sold. And let's look at this case study in a bit more detail. So first, let's begin with a draft law. Back in July of 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the first draft law of the Union. And here's the basic sketch. The draft was random. But anyone who was drafted but did not want to serve can hire someone in their place, and they can pay for someone else to go in their place. So someone had to go. But what this effectively did is that poor people were drafted, forced, coerced into being military by being chosen randomly. And wealthy people were given the option of themselves going or hiring someone in their stead. So it was only wealthy people, again, that had the freedom to decide what to do because they had the wealth. And poor people were just, like most of the time, forced into an uncomfortable situation. And this law was not very popular, obviously. Like people did not like that much. But for our purposes, let's ask: is this a fair practice? What, if anything, went wrong? Notice that the buying, like paying someone to go on your behalf, is a voluntary market exchange, right? There's a thing you want them to do, namely go to war on your behalf, and there's something that they want that you have, namely some money. So the buying of a replacement for serving, going into the army, is just another market exchange, and yet seems to be cheapened. Something has gone wrong when it's done this way. It was turned into a commodity, something that was not supposed to have been. The market has darkened, cheapened, stained something that otherwise would have been better. But if it is wrong for private individuals to hire soldiers to fight on their behalf, why is this acceptable for the state, right? That's what the state does. They hire people to go to war. Is there a legitimate difference between the activities of the state versus that of the individual? If one is outraged by this policy, and a lot of people were, why are we not equally outraged by the government buying, giving people money so they can go to war? What has changed? If what darkened, what stained the interaction was that it was turned into a commodity, becoming a soldier was turned into a commodity, that's exactly how the voluntary army works now. It's turned into a commodity. You pay people so they can go to the army. So if the argument against the draft law signed by Lincoln was that it cheapened the activity of becoming a soldier, we have that in a massive scale now. So it becomes an argument against the way we do things now, the voluntary army. Let's talk a little bit more about the voluntary argument in the voluntary army. And here are some considerations for questioning whether or not that's the right label, whether people that go to war in the way things work now, namely the government, there's no drafting, no one's forced, it's just voluntary. That is, people show up and say, hey, I want to go. And in exchange for their volunteering, the army gives them money, right? They get paid for their services. That's how things go now. Question for us, is that transaction really free? Or does it look like something else? Is it more coerced than free? So question, is the homeless sleeping under the bridge? Is he doing so freely? Is that an expression of his freedom, or is something else happening here? Well, it seems like something else is happening here. He sleeps there not because he prefers to sleep in the outside conditions instead of a comfortable home. He sleeps there not because that's his expression of his freedom or his preference, but because he has no other options. He has no better options. His lack of economic means, he has no money to pay for a house or a hotel, makes his sleeping under the bridge the only other option. The homeless sleeps under the bridge not as an expression of a free man doing what he wills, what he wants, but rather as an expression of someone who's coerced into, who's forced into by his circumstances, into taking something he doesn't want, but has no other option because of his limited economic capacities or powers. So his limited economic means force him, or at least significantly reduce his freedom to do other than sleep under the bridge. Is the army significantly different than the homeless? Is the army case? Do soldiers enlist voluntarily as a free expression of their will, or are some of their actions more like the homeless? Historically, most soldiers, not all soldiers, of course, a lot of people come from like very patriotic families that their parents have been soldiers, their grandparents have been soldiers, they have a lot of means, economic means, and they go into as a call of duty. And I'm not talking about those people. Obviously, they're freely choosing to go to the army. But that's not the majority, at least throughout history. Throughout history, the majority of soldiers have not been people of economic means who can become doctors without going to the army, who can, have other alternative lifestyles that are worthwhile, and then they choose to go to the army. That just has not been the majority of the cases of soldiers. Um, Most soldiers have come from the poorer members of society, the poor members of society that find the monetary incentives offered enticing and greater than, or at least as good as, typically greater than, any options they may have. Most soldiers, actual soldiers, go to the army partly because it is one of the most economically profit paths they can take. And that stains, that colors the authentic reading of their action as an expression of freedom, and not more the constrained activity of someone with limited options, like the worker on the previous screen or this homeless here under the bridge. Only if people have a reasonable range of comparable job options can their decisions to serve not be colored by the limited economic alternatives. So this is, again, the same point. It takes enough wealth on your pocket so that your actions in the market can be an expression of legitimate freedom. You have a multiplicity of options before you're forced to neither of them. You will eat regardless of where you go. You will have a shelter regardless of where you go. And that opens up space for you to think about, to deliberate. What do you want to do with your life? And then you do it on the basis of your freedom. You express yourself. You express your identity. The less money you have in your pocket, the less you're actually deliberating and expressing your freedom, the more you're doing what you must do to survive, or what you must do to get ahead. And that looks a lot less like freedom. And historically, most soldiers have been in that group, not the voluntary ones that with a lot of economic means. So let's end this discussion with a few reasons against the voluntary argument. Well, I'm sorry, the voluntary army. The way we do things now. The way we do things is no one's coerced, no one's enlisted, no one's drafted. Everyone who wants to go goes, and only those that want to go. But there's a monetary incentive behind it. And it seems like an ideal setting, but here are some reasons for thinking that it's not ideal. So one, and this is the same point that has been recurring throughout this discussion, this lecture, economic inequality makes the voluntary army a lot less voluntary and less free. It is only those of limited economic resources that find the monetary compensation appealing and end up choosing partly because of the monetary compensation. So it becomes more like the homeless choosing to sleep under the bridge, or the poor man choosing to take a very low wage. It's a choice in some sense, but it's a very limited sense of choice. The more wealth you have, the more it's a true expression of your freedom to do something you don't have to do. And that applies to the army as well. Two, the rich and powerful would be much less willing to declare wars. Those that are, making the actual decisions to go to war, they would be a lot less willing to and likely to make those decisions if they knew their own children would be sent and might die. The way things run now, the people making the decisions to go to war are not connected directly to those that are going to war and are dying. And that distance is morally uncomfortable. The distance allows for a more facile, for a more quick willingness to go to war because you are not going, your children are not going, people that you care about deeply that you know are not going because they can choose not to go. So the way things are running now, it allows for more violence. It allows for more wars, and more, otherwise unnecessary wars. The decision to go to war is hard, but this enables the decision. It makes it more likely that people would decide to go. And third, and lastly, serving one's country, going to becoming a soldier, should not be seen as another commodity to be purchased. Something has gone wrong when people think that way. When it is treated as a mere commodity to be sold and bought in the market, it cheapens it like it cheapens sexual activity. It should not just be another job. Arguably, it's a kind of civic duty. It's a kind of commitment to the well-being of the whole. One must do things to promote the well-being of the whole, and unfortunately, sometimes that means defending the whole from enemies. And unfortunately, in those cases, it means becoming a soldier. But that is the call of duty to defend one's community, not a thing you buy in the market. to put it up for sale in the market cheapens it in a similar way in which it cheapens things like renting your womb or sexual activities or something like that. Again, the same point. Wealthy people can choose and do choose not to fulfill this civic duty. The wealth gives them freedom. In this time, it seems like an uncomfortable freedom. The freedom not to do what they ought to, right? And the duty is something you ought to do. The freedom to be a bad member of society, one who does not give in to, does not comply with the duties or responsibilities of a good participant of society, someone who takes advantage of the benefits but refuses to pay the responsibilities, the price of the responsibilities. The way the army structure now, wealthy people can and often do choose to not comply with their duty. In general, civic responsibilities diminish. So does the justice of the society. If people feel like they can get the benefits of society but not comply with the duties, it creates a society of inequalities. It creates a society of less respect, a less just society. People that stop caring about the well-being of the whole and start only being concerned with themselves. And that's the kind of thing that follows from allowing people to buy their way out of fulfilling a duty. And that's what we're seeing now. Okay, let's end there. We'll see you next time.